Welcome to the final 2019 NHL Draft recap video. Today we're going to be looking at the Boston Bruins here at Scouching. Now the Boston Bruins didn't have a ton of draft picks this year, but they did lead the way by going a little bit off the board and going with John Beecher. But I don't think this was a bad pick at all. I saw John Beecher play quite a few times this year, and let me tell you, most of the time he wasn't really doing a tremendous amount, mostly because he was a third-line checking role player. But there were times where I would watch him play and I'd go, oh, I didn't know you could do that, John. He's a fast, big, physical, offensive center. I really like the package of tools this guy brings. At the end of the day, he could be a good middle six offensive contributor with solid two-way numbers. I don't know if he has the offensive upside to be a real top-line threat for the Boston Bruins down the line, but the fact that he's going to be able to learn from Patrice Bergeron for the next few years is a really nice situation to be in. Not saying they're the same player, but there are similar qualities. You don't really notice a whole lot of what Patrice Bergeron is doing unless you really look for it, and I felt the same way with John Beecher. I always felt that he had flashes of real high upside, so I do like this pick at 30, even if his statistics and his metrics aren't the most promising of all the guys that you might have available to you at 30th overall. The Bruins then used their 92nd overall pick to take Quinn Olson. Olson was over 30% involvement on a pretty good AJHL team, so that's really nice. I do think it was a bit of a reach in this range, but at 92 you can't really complain too much about the guys that you take. I just felt like there were some better players on the board at this pick for the Boston Bruins, but they have done really well with their depth picks in the last few years, so I'm not really willing to throw the baby out with the bathwater yet for the Bruins. At 154th though, the Bruins went out and drafted Roman Bechkov, who plays for Loko Yaroslavl, like many of his line mates who got drafted in the draft this year. And I did see him play a few times, and when I saw him get drafted, I really wasn't sure it was that the Bruins saw in him. I was never really impressed in any of my viewings, and I don't really know how to describe his style of play. And in this range, someone like Marshall Warren was available, who I really thought would have been a really good fit for the Boston Bruins on their back end. But I mean, if you like what you see out of a defenseman in the MHL, then I guess you take your swing at this range of the draft. But in the same breath, at 185th overall, they took Matthias Monty, and I was really glad to see a team give this kid a shot. He scored a ton of points in the Finnish Junior League this year, and I always really liked watching him play. He's a smart, playmaking offensive threat who's got great hands and pretty good feet. He's undersized and he will need to build some strength, but he could be one of these guys that comes out of the late rounds of the draft and we go, who is this guy? And he ends up being a Boston Bruin and the Bruins are in the conference final and he's leading the way. He just strikes me as that kind of an upside player. I don't know if he'll get there, but it's possible. I like Montekivi quite a bit, and I always felt that his ranking on the NHL Central Scouting list around 100 was always kind of undervaluing what he brought to the ice whenever I watched him play, so I'm really glad that the Boston Bruins are giving him a shot. And then at 192, the Boston Bruins closed out their draft by going for Jake Schmaltz. And when I looked at the on-ice metrics that I tracked of him this year, and I look at his on-ice production and historical comparables with him, he's a guy, I guess. I mean, shoot your shot. It's 192nd overall. You can't complain too much, but I really felt that there were quite a few players that might have been bigger swings the Bruins could have taken. And with Jake Schmaltz, he probably wasn't a guy that was really a big threat to be drafted based on his production. So you could have maybe let him develop for another year and see where it goes. But I guess if you like the player, you like the player. And I think the Boston Bruins scouts have really built up a lot of goodwill over the years based on these later round guys that kind of come out of nowhere. I just feel like this might be a little bit too far off the board for my liking at least. So if you've watched any other Scouching reports or any of the other draft profiles we've put together, we're translating the same ranking system into these videos. The number is going to indicate the overall level of potential a draft class has to me, and the letter indicates the likelihood of reaching that potential. For the Boston Bruins, this one's a really hard one to judge, especially because John Beecher played a relatively limited role on such a talented team. But I did come away quite impressed with at least John Beecher and to a lesser extent Matthias Monty for the Boston Bruins this year. So I think I'm giving them a strong 3D. I think John Beecher at the very least will be an NHL contributor and at the very least a good two-way player. He's got the speed, he's got the size, he's got the physicality, and there's good skill there with him, and I think he was a good pickup at 30. I think Matthias Monty is a big swing for the fences, but if it works out, it could work out really nicely for the Boston Bruins as well. Quinn Olson, Roman Bechkov, and Jake Schmaltz are, I don't know, Who knows, guys? So I don't mean to categorize this as necessarily a bad draft, but there were certainly players who were on the board when the Boston Bruins stepped up to the podium that they chose not to take for whatever reasons they have, and I feel like they just left a lot of value on the board for what felt like bigger swings in the dark. So that's it for the Boston Bruins, and that is it for the 2019 NHL Draft Recap Series here at Scouching. If you watched one or all 31 of these videos, thank you very much for joining, and I hope you enjoyed profiling every single team's draft class here. So if you liked the video, be sure to click all the buttons you see below me so you never miss another video. If you really like what we do, you could support us on Patreon, where you get access to spreadsheets for drafted and undrafted prospects, private chat rooms, input on players I should be tracking for Scouching reports, and plenty of other goodies. Or you could pick up some merchandise from the Scouchwear shop. All the links are in the description below. So once again, thank you for joining me in this video series. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll catch you in the next one. Oh.